The garden visitor Walter lived alone in a small wooden house at the edge of a dry, quiet desert. He was old, with a long white beard and hands rough like sandpaper. The town nearby had only a gas station, one grocery store, and a school that hadn't had a full classroom in years. But Walter didn't care about any of that. He loved his garden. His garden was strange for this part of the desert. Green vines climbed wooden poles, tomatoes grew bright and round, and a fig tree gave him sweet fruit every summer. He had no wife, no children, and no visitors, just his garden, his books, and the stars above. Then one week, strange things began to happen. Figs started disappearing at night at first. Walter thought maybe birds were getting to them, but the way the fruit was picked clean, without bite marks, felt odd. He checked the dirt, and that's when he noticed the tracks. They were small, too small for a grown person. Three-toed, not shaped like any shoe or foot he had ever seen. They circled the fig tree, then disappeared into the sand. He waited 3 nights in a row, sitting on his porch in silence. But nothing came. Then on the 4th night, when the wind was still and the moon was bright, he saw something move. At first, he thought it was a child. But no child had skin that glowed softly under the moon. The small figure tiptoed toward the tree, moving fast but careful. Walter held his breath as he watched. Not wanting to scare it, the figure reached up and grabbed a fig. Then another. Just as it was about to leave, Walter gently turned on his flashlight. A soft beam lit the garden, and the figure froze, caught in the light like a deer. It was a girl, but not like any girl he'd ever seen. She was tiny, maybe just 3 feet tall, with light blue skin that shimmered in the dark. Her eyes were huge and glowing violet, her nose flat, and her ears pointed like leaves. She wore what looked like a silver cloth tied around her like a robe, torn and dusty. In her hand were 3 figs, clutched tight against her chest. She didn't run, not right away. Walter saw fear in her eyes, but also hunger, and something else, loneliness. He stepped forward slowly and spoke. "You don't have to steal. You know," he said softly. The girl didn't answer. She looked left and right like she might bolt, but her feet stayed in place. Walter bent down, placed a few more figs on the ground, then backed away. "Go ahead. Take them," he said. "You look hungry." The girl stared at him for a few seconds, then slowly stepped forward and picked up the figs. She took 1 bite and chewed fast, her eyes lighting up even more. She finished the first fig in seconds. Then the second. Walter watched quietly as she ate. He didn't speak, just stood near the tree with his hands in his pockets. When she finished, she pointed at herself and said, "Lura." Her voice was soft, like a bird singing far away. Walter pointed to his own chest and replied, "Walter." Lura tilted her head and gave a small smile. It was the first time he saw her relax, even just a little. Then a cold gust of wind blew across the desert, and Lura shivered. Walter looked at her robe, thin and torn, and sighed. "Come on," he said, nodding toward his house. "You'll freeze out here." She hesitated for a moment, then followed him, keeping a few steps behind. Inside, Walter gave her a blanket and an old bowl of cut fruit. She sat on the floor and ate without a word. He didn't ask where she came from or what she was. Knew she wasn't from this world, but somehow she didn't seem dangerous, just lost. Later that night, she curled up in a corner with the blanket. Walter sat in his chair and stared at her for a long time. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but deep down, he felt something had changed. The stars outside looked closer than usual, as if watching. And in the silence of that old house, a strange bond had started. One between an old man and a visitor from the stars. A bond made not with words, but with fruit, kindness, and a little bit of trust. Asterisk, her name was Lura. The morning sun burned gently over the desert. Orange light stretched across the dry ground, touching Walter's garden and spilling into his dusty living room. The small alien girl was still asleep, curled tight in the blanket. Like a kitten, her chest rose and fell slowly, and her tiny hands gripped a fig pit as if it were something valuable. Walter sat in his chair, holding the cup of cold coffee. He hadn't slept, not really. He kept watching her, this strange visitor who called herself Laura. She didn't look dangerous, but that didn't mean she was safe. Still, she hadn't tried to harm him, and she ate fruit like any hungry child would. When she finally opened her eyes, she looked scared. She sat up fast and looked around the room, blinking at the light. Walter raised one hand slowly and spoke in a calm voice. "You're okay," he said. "You're in my house, remember?" She tilted her head again, those big purple eyes blinking slow. Then she said softly, "Walter," and pointed at him. Her voice was still a whisper, but now it held warmth. He smiled and nodded. "That's me," he said. "And you're Laura." She nodded once, then held her hand to her chest and said, "Laura," again. Her stomach growled loudly, and Walter stood up without a word. He fixed her a plate, fruit slices, bread, and a glass of clean water. She ate carefully, always glancing up at him, studying his movements like a wild animal learning to trust. Walter wasn't good with children. He had never had any. But this wasn't just a child. This was something other, and she was alone, scared, and far from home after breakfast. Laura stood up and walked to the window. She looked outside at the garden, at the sky, then at the road. Walter noticed her eyes lingered on the clouds. There was sadness there, a deep kind that didn't belong in someone so small. He pulled out a children's picture book from a box under his bookshelf. It had simple English words and drawings, animals, shapes, colors. He placed it in front of her and said, "Book," while tapping the cover. She looked at it, then back at him. He opened the first page and pointed at a cat. "Cat," he said, slowly. She copied him, her voice soft but clear. "Cat." Then she smiled, a real one this time, wide and pure. They spent hours going through the book. She repeated every word, sometimes struggling with sounds, but always trying. Walter was surprised how fast she learned. By the end of the afternoon, she could point and say words like tree, water, star, and bird. At one point, Walter pointed at her and asked, "Where from?" She looked confused, so he tried again, this time pointing up at the sky. "Laura." "Home." Her face changed. She slowly raised her hand and pointed toward the sky, far beyond the clouds. Then she drew a shape in the air, a round circle with a tail. She pressed her fingers together and said, "Boom," then frowned. Walter understood only a little. He guessed she had come from the sky, and something went wrong. A crash maybe, or an accident, but he didn't push. He just nodded slowly and said, "Okay." That night, she sat outside on the porch with him, wrapped in a thicker blanket. She looked up at the stars like they were calling her, and maybe they were. Walter lit a small lantern and handed her another fig. "You like these, huh?" he asked. She smiled and took a bite, nodding fast. Then she did something that surprised him. She held out half of her fig to him, offering it. He took it, stunned, and smiled. That was trust, right there in her tiny fingers. Later, as the desert cooled and the crickets began to sing, Walter spoke aloud. "I don't know why you're here, Laura," he said softly. "But maybe, just maybe, I was meant to find you." She didn't reply, but she leaned her head on his arm, and that said everything. Visitors in the night. 3 days passed, and Walter's small house no longer felt so quiet. Laura had learned to say simple sentences like, "I want fruit," and "Sky, go home." She laughed when the wind blew through her hair, and sometimes she even hummed a strange tune that made the birds stop and listen. Walter felt younger around her, though he didn't say it. But trouble doesn't need permission to come knocking. It started with the black car. It rolled into town one afternoon, sleek and silent, covered in dust but too clean for the desert. Walter saw it while buying canned beans at the store. 2 men stepped out, one tall, wearing dark sunglasses, the other holding a small silver box with blinking lights. They didn't say hello to anyone, just started asking questions. "Anyone see strange lights last week? Any loud noises at night? Anyone new around here?" People shook their heads, nervous. The tall man showed a badge, government type. No smile on his face. Walter turned and left the store before they saw him. His heart thudded in his chest like a hammer on wood. Back home, Laura sat in the garden drawing in the dirt with a stick. She had drawn a picture of a ship with wings and a mountain beside it. Walter crouched next to her and whispered, "Laura, we have to hide you now." She looked at him, confused. He pointed to the sky, then to the road, then put a finger to his lips. "Bad people coming," he said. Laura's face grew serious. She understood enough. Walter led her to the old shed behind the house. It was filled with tools, broken furniture, and dust. He cleared space in the corner and laid down blankets. "Stay here," he said. "Be quiet. Don't come out unless I say." She nodded and curled up small like a cat hiding from the rain. Walter shut the door and walked back toward the porch. Before he could sit, he saw the black car coming down the dirt road. The tires crunched on gravel as it stopped in front of his house. The two men stepped out, both wearing blank faces. "Afternoon," said the tall one. "Name's Agent Brooke. This here is Agent Mills." Walter nodded slowly, wiping his hands. On his shirt, "Something I can help you with?" he asked, pretending not to know. "We're tracking a possible meteor crash nearby," Brooke said. "Saw some unusual energy readings just past this area." The other man pointed a small device toward the hills, its lights blinking faster. "Anyone stop by? Strangers, hikers, kids poking around?" Walter shook his head. "Haven't seen a soul in days," he said. "Just me and the tomatoes." Brooke glanced at the garden, then back at Walter. "You mind if we take a look around?" Walter smiled tightly. "Be my guest," he said. Though his stomach twisted into knots, the two men walked slowly through the garden, one scanning the fig tree, the other peeking into the house. Walter stood firm, arms crossed, heart pounding. Then one of them headed toward the shed. Walter stepped forward fast. "Nothing but junk in there," he said. "Old paint cans and busted tools." But Brooke had already opened the door. He stepped inside, glanced around, then stepped back. "Out? Yeah, nothing," he said flatly. "Thanks for your time." They got in the car and drove off, leaving a trail of dust. Walter didn't move until the car disappeared down the road. Only then did he walk to the shed and open the door again. Laura was gone. Panic gripped his chest. He looked under the bench. Behind the shelves, nothing. Then he heard it soft tapping. Behind the back wall, he moved a wooden panel and found a crawl space he'd forgotten about. Inside, Laura crouched, wide-eyed, hugging her knees. He let out a long breath. "You did good, kid," he whispered, reaching out to help her up. That night, they didn't speak much. Laura sat by the window, staring at the sky like she was thinking hard. Then she said something that stopped Walter cold. "Home." "Broken," she said. "Ship." "Need fix." Walter turned toward her. "Your ship's still out there?" She nodded slowly, then pointed toward the hills. Far beyond the rocks and dry shrubs, something glimmered faintly in the moonlight. Walter stared for a long time. He knew what he had to do. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll go. The secrets." She Hides the Desert was still asleep when Walter stepped outside with a flashlight in hand. The stars above were fading, and a soft wind whispered through the cacti. Laura stood by the fence, already waiting, her silver robe fluttering in the breeze like it had a life of its own. She looked up at him, her violet eyes calm but serious. "Now," she said softly. Walter nodded. He had packed water, a few tools, and one of his old jackets in case the desert turned cold again. Laura didn't carry anything, just herself, and whatever secret she was hiding. They moved quietly across the sand, cutting through dry grass and scattered rocks. The hills weren't far, maybe a mile from his house, but the path wasn't easy as they climbed higher. The wind grew stronger, and Laura walked faster like she was being pulled towards something. Walter's knees ached, but he kept going. At the top of the ridge, she stopped. She pointed down to a patch of land hidden between boulders, from above. It looked like a crater, shallow but scorched black in the center. Walter followed her down, his boots crunching over broken stone. Then he saw it. A curved piece of strange metal half buried in the ground. It shimmered with soft blue light. Smooth and cold like frozen water. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a small car, but it hummed softly, alive somehow. Lura ran to it and placed both hands on the surface. As soon as she touched it, something clicked. A piece of the metal split open, revealing a glowing screen and strange symbols dancing across it. Walter's eyes widened. He had seen machines all his life, but nothing like this. Lura turned toward him and spoke. "Not full ship," she said, pointing at the wreck. "Heart of ship," Walter blinked. "You mean this is just part of it?" She nodded, then pointed toward the sky. "Ship go boom," she said. "Fall apart, only this left." Then she pulled a small crystal from her robe, glowing faintly. "Need this," she said, "to call home." Walter stepped closer and looked at the crystal. It pulsed in her hand like it had a heartbeat. He didn't understand the science, but he understood the feeling. This was her last hope, her only way back. "But it broken," she said, voice heavy. "Need help," Walter crouched beside the alien machine and studied its inside. Wires curled like veins. Lights blinked in strange rhythms. He saw burnt parts, cracked panels, and something that looked like a battery half dead. "I can try," he said, though he wasn't sure what he could do. He didn't fix spaceships, he fixed fences and pipes. But he had to try. The next few days were quiet but busy. They worked together in the shed behind his house. Walter brought tools, batteries, wires, anything he thought might help. Lura opened panels, checked circuits, and taught him symbols one by one. She was smart, maybe smarter than any human child. She didn't talk much, but she watched everything. And when she smiled after something finally lit up, it made Walter's heart feel warm. At night, she showed him things. She placed the crystal into a slot, and a glowing image floated in the air. It was her family, 3 tall beings with the same violet eyes, standing in a glowing room full of lights and stars. One of them looked older, maybe her mother. The other 2 had soft faces and wide smiles. Walter watched in silence. The images didn't last long, but they told a story of home, of travel, and of something going wrong. She didn't have to explain everything. He could see the pain in her eyes. She was far from home, and that home might not even know she was alive. That night, Walter sat on the porch, looking at the stars with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Lura came beside him and sat down, pressing close like a child does when they feel safe. "I fix," she said quietly. "Then go." Walter nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "that's what you should do." But he felt a deep ache in his chest. He didn't know when it had happened, but the thought of her leaving now felt like losing something precious. She wasn't just a visitor anymore. She'd become a part of his world, far in the distance. A pair of headlights flickered near the horizon. Too late for travelers, too slow for locals. Walter narrowed his eyes. Something was coming, and it wasn't good. The chase begins. The sound of tires crunching over gravel echoed in the night. Walter turned off the porch light and stood still, watching from the shadows. The same black car returned, sleek, silent, and far too slow, like it was hunting. But this time it wasn't alone. 2 more vehicles followed, unmarked but military style. Dust rose behind them like ghosts in the dark. Walter's hand gripped the wooden railing as his heart started pounding again. He stepped back inside and locked the door without slamming it. In the back room, Lura was sitting cross-legged, working on the alien device with glowing wires in her lap. She looked up as he entered, sensing his fear before he spoke. "They're back," Walter whispered. "More of them this time." Lura's face stayed calm, but her eyes flashed with alarm. She held up the crystal. It pulsed blue. "Stronger now, almost ready," she said, her voice tighter than before. Walter looked out the side window. The black car had stopped in front of his house, but the others were spreading out. He didn't know how they knew, but they weren't guessing anymore. They were sure. Time was up. "Grab your things," Walter said, grabbing his jacket and a flashlight. "We're not staying here tonight." Lura stood, Holding the crystal close to her chest, Walter scooped the alien machine into a heavy cloth bag. Then they slipped out the back door, silent as shadows. The desert night wrapped around them like a cold blanket. They moved quickly through tall grass and broken fences, heading toward the hills where the ship core had first been found. Behind them, flashlights clicked on white beams sweeping through the garden. Voices shouted, "There! Here! Fan out! Check the shed!" Eyes on the ground look for fresh tracks. Walter and Lura ran. He wasn't fast, but fear made his legs move like they hadn't in years. Lura led the way, small and light, skipping over rocks and ducking under branches. She stopped only once, pointing toward an opening in the side of the hill. An old mine, abandoned decades ago. It had a wooden sign half buried in dirt, and a rusted gate that creaked when they pulled it open. Inside was pitch black and freezing cold. Walter turned on his flashlight, the beam shaking slightly. In his hand, they moved deep into the mine, past wooden supports and broken tracks. The air smelled of dust and time. Far behind, the voices were getting closer. Lura stopped in a wide chamber and sat down fast, pulling out the crystal. "It time," she said. "Needs signal." She opened the device and placed the crystal inside. Blue light exploded across them. Cave walls like liquid stars, symbols floated in the air, and a high-pitched hum filled the silence. Walter shielded his eyes. It was beautiful and terrifying at once. "Are you calling them?" he asked, breathless. Lura nodded. "They hear me now," she said. "They come." But the light so bright, so loud, was like a beacon. Outside, the agents picked up the signal fast. "We've got movement," someone shouted. "Energy spiked this way." Boots stomped across rock and gravel. Walter looked around the cave, heart racing. "No way out but the front," he whispered. Then he saw a gap in the rocks, a crack near the far wall, just wide enough. He grabbed Lura's hand. "This way," he said, pulling her toward it. She paused, pointing back at the glowing device. "Leave it," Walter said. "It already sent the signal." They crawled through the crack just as flashlights broke into the cave. The agents stopped, blinking at the alien light still shining from the floor. "What is this thing?" one asked, stepping closer. Another agent touched the crystal, and it shocked him backward, knocking him down. "Secure the area," someone yelled. "They're still close." Outside, Walter and Lura stumbled into a dry wash below the hill. They hid behind boulders, gasping for breath. Above them, searchlights swept across the rocks. Dogs barked in the distance, and the night was no longer quiet. Lura turned to him and whispered, "They know." Walter nodded, sweat running down his face. "Yeah, they know." But then, in the far sky, something changed. A new light blinked red, then blue, then silver. It wasn't a star, and it wasn't a plane. It moved in patterns, sharp and purposeful. Lura stared, her eyes wide. "They come," she whispered again. "They really come." Walter looked at the light. He didn't know what was about to happen, but he knew it would be big. And nothing would ever be the same again. Sacrifice under stars. The stars above the desert pulsed like beating hearts. But one light was different. It moved faster than any plane, gliding across the sky in perfect silence. Walter and Lura crouched behind a rock, watching it grow brighter with every second. "That's your ride?" Walter whispered. Lura nodded slowly. "Ship," she said, her voice full of hope. "They find me." But their time was running out. The agents weren't far behind, shouting orders, calling in drones, spreading wider every minute. A small quad drone buzzed past overhead, scanning the rocks with blinking red sensors. Walter pulled Lura closer under the ledge, holding his breath. The drone hovered for a moment, then zipped away. But they both knew more would follow. The signal had worked too well. Everyone, her people, and the humans knew where to look now. Lura pulled out the crystal again, checking it like a compass. Its blue light pulsed slowly. "Ship, wait," she said. "But not long." Walter looked up at the stars. He never thought he'd be the kind of man to help an alien escape Earth. But here he was, an old man, covered in dirt, risking everything for a girl who didn't belong here, but somehow belonged with him. "We need to move," he said, fast and quiet. They followed the edge of a canyon, keeping to the shadows. A distant rumble echoed through the desert, helicopter blades slicing the night. Lura pointed upward, eyes wide. "Not mine," she said, voice tight with fear. "Yours." The helicopter swept in low, its spotlight slicing through the night. Like a blade, Walter and Lura ducked under a rocky outcrop as the beam passed just inches above them. Then it moved on, circling wide, in the distance. A silver shape descended smooth, glowing, silent. It hovered just above the sand like it was waiting. A ramp opened underneath, flooding the ground with soft white light. Lura stood slowly, the glow painting her skin like moonlight. "It's time," she said, eyes locked on the ship. Walter stared at the vessel, breath caught in his throat. This was real. This was goodbye. He took a step forward, but Lura didn't move. She turned to him, holding the crystal in one hand and something small in the other, a round metallic disc. She held it out to him. "For you," she said. "You protect me." Walter took the disc, confused. "What is it?" "Memory," she said. "All you give me." "I remember." He felt his throat tighten. "I don't want a memory, Lura," he said, voice cracking. "I just want you to be safe." Before she could answer, gunshots cracked across the canyon. "Go!" Walter shouted. "Run!" But Lura didn't move. She looked at him with wide, wet eyes. "Come to," she said. "Come home." Walter shook his head slowly. "I can't," he said. "That's not my sky." He pushed her gently toward the light. "You go," he said again. "I'll buy you time." She grabbed his hand, refusing to let go. Tears rolled down her cheeks, glowing faintly in the ship's light. "Walter, stay safe," she whispered. "Always," he replied. Then he turned and ran back into the darkness toward the agents, away from the ship. He waved his arms and shouted, "Hey! Over here!" The spotlight snapped toward him, followed by voices and running boots. He led them away deeper into the canyon, into a maze of rocks. Behind him, the silver ship rose quietly into the air. Its light faded as it vanished into the stars. Lura was gone. She had made it. That was all that mattered. The agents tackled Walter near the edge of a dry stream bed. They shoved him to the ground, barking questions. "What was that craft? Where is the being? What did you help escape?" Walter didn't say a word. He just stared at the stars with tired eyes and a quiet smile. They could arrest him, question him, lock him away. He didn't care, because she was free, and maybe one day she'd return. A garden under strange skies. Years passed. The desert stayed quiet, and the town grew smaller. The gas station closed, the school shut down, and the only grocery store turned into a rusted sign and an empty lot. But the little house at the edge of town still stood, and the garden, Walter's garden, was still alive, even greener than before. Figs grew in heavy clusters. Tomatoes bloomed without end. Birds visited that garden more than any other place. For miles, the man who kept it now moved slower, with a cane in one hand and a flask of warm tea in the other. His beard was longer, his shoulders more bent, but his eyes still watched the stars each night. Waiting, always waiting. He had never spoken of what happened. No one believed his story anyway. The agents came and went. The questions stopped after a while. They found no ship, no proof. Just an old man and a garden full of life. Walter didn't care. He remembered everything. The strange blue light, the soft voice, the little hand that once held his own. And the promise. She said she'd come back. One evening, the sky shifted. Not like before, not fire or crashing or sound. Just a strange silence, the kind of silence that feels thick, like the world is holding its breath. Walter stepped onto the porch, cane tapping gently against the wooden floor. The sun had set, and the stars were just beginning to glow. Then he saw it just above the fig tree, floating quietly in the air. A ship, silver and smooth, round like a drop of water frozen in time. It didn't make a sound. It just hovered, glowing softly under the stars. Then, a ramp opened underneath, and a figure stepped out. She was taller now, no longer a child, but her skin still shimmered like moonlight, and her eyes still glowed. With that gentle violet light, she wore a long robe of deep blue, covered in symbols that shimmered like constellations. Walter took a slow step forward. He didn't say anything, he couldn't. His chest felt tight, his eyes full of warmth he hadn't felt in years. The girl smiled. "Walter," she said softly. "You wait." He nodded, unable to speak. "I promised," she said, taking another step closer. Then she held something out, a seed, glowing faintly in her hand. "For your garden," she said. "Gift from my world." Walter took it gently, staring at the small glowing seed resting in his wrinkled palm. "Does it grow?" he asked quietly. Lura nodded. "With time," she said, "it grow like me." Then she looked around the garden, at the fig tree, the tomatoes, the green life blooming in dry land. "It's still alive," she whispered. "Still home." Walter smiled. "I kept it for you," he said. "Fig tree's doing better than me these days." She laughed, soft and bright. Then she sat beside him on the old wooden bench, the same way she used to sit when she was small. They watched the stars together for a while, no words needed, before she left. She placed a small silver box next to the porch steps. "In case you need me," she said, "or want to see more." Walter touched her shoulder gently. "Thank you, Lura," he said, "for coming back." "I never forget," she replied. "Never forget the man who gave me figs when I was lost." The ship rose quietly, slipping into the sky like it had always belonged there. Walter stood and watched until it disappeared into the stars. He looked down at the glowing seed in his hand, then at the soft earth near the fig tree. Without a word, he knelt and planted it. Weeks passed, then months, and one day, something new bloomed. A plant unlike anything Earth had ever seen, leaves like silver glass, petals that glowed under moonlight, and fruit that shimmered softly in the dark. People came to see it, but no one could explain it. They asked Walter, but he only smiled and offered them figs. He never told them the truth, because the truth wasn't for the world, it was for him and for the stars. And each night, under strange skies, the old man sat in his garden, listening to the wind, waiting, but no longer alone.